We're now going to look at how to complete a MARAC referral and risk assessment. The first page focuses on the victim and perpetrator details. Firstly, it asks for your details as a referrer. Please supply your contact number and email address, as the IDVA may need to get in contact with you as a referrer for further information. When inputting the victim details, it is important that contact details for the victim are supplied, as this is how the IDVA will initially make contact. Even more important is whether this is a safe number to contact. Please ask the victim if it is safe for them to receive voicemails or text messages, or if there are particular times of the day to contact them and when this is safe. Please make sure this is documented. The next section focuses on the perpetrator details. Please provide as much information that is known. The start of page 2 follows in the same vein as page 1, where you can now record details of any children. Please ensure you complete as much information as possible, as this may be needed for safeguarding purposes. It is important to record the relationship of the child to the perpetrator, as this may raise issues around child contact or parental responsibility. The next 4 boxes give you the opportunity to record if the child or children have been present in the house at the recent incident, or if they have witnessed the incident itself. If you are making a referral to MARAC, as you have assessed the victim as being high risk of harm and there are children in the household, a safeguarding referral should always be submitted to first response. The next section deals with the reason for the referral. The first 4 boxes are the 4 thresholds for referring a case to MARAC. The first threshold is 14 yes answers on the risk assessment below. Once you have completed the risk assessment with the victim, a score of 14 or higher automatically places the victim as high risk, and therefore a referral to MARAC should be made. You should add your comments into this box where you can write any details pertaining to the recent incident that has triggered this referral. The second threshold is a MARAC repeat. If this victim has been heard at MARAC already in the past 12 months and there is a further incident, this should automatically be referred back to MARAC. You can write the details of the further incidents in this box. The third threshold is potential escalation. This is in relation to the number of incidents that have occurred in the past 12 months. This criteria can be used to identify cases where there is not a positive identification of a majority of the risk factors on the list, but where abuse appears to be escalating or has the potential to escalate. It's common practice to start with 3 domestic abuse occurrences in a 12-month period. You can type the details of the instance and how this is escalating in this space. The last threshold for a referral to MARAC is professional judgment. This can be used where the above 3 criteria do not apply. It is really important that you fill out this box with as much detail as possible as to why, as a professional, you feel this victim is at risk of serious harm or homicide. This could be a number of factors, for example, concerns a victim is unable to disclose the full extent of abuse due to fear, minimisation, extreme or sadistic acts of violence or control, a perpetrator's previous criminal history, credible threats to kill, for example holding a gun to a victim. These are just some examples, but please ensure you document your reasons for concern if you're referring under professional judgment. The next couple of boxes deal with consent, and if the victim is aware that you are making the referral to MARAC and if they've given consent for this. Now, while it is good practice to get the victim's consent for a referral to MARAC, if you have assessed them as high risk, MARAC referrals can and should still be made regardless of consent. It is important to document whether consent has been obtained, as this lets other agencies know if the victim has been made aware of the referral and whether or not they have consented to this. The next box looks at who the victim is afraid of. This may just be the perpetrator, but this is important to ask this question and document what the victim says, as there may be more than one perpetrator, for example in cases of honour-based violence or if the perpetrator is involved with gangs. We then go on to look at the victim and any additional vulnerabilities they may have. This is important as vulnerabilities may increase risk factors and need to be considered during any safety planning. You should document any physical disabilities, illnesses, mental health issues, drug or alcohol issues, language barriers, age that may be relevant to the victim. We then look at whether the perpetrator has made any threats of arson. Please document what threats have been made and if a referral to the fire service has already been made for a safe and well check. The next box is just for any relevant information that you may hold as a professional that may affect the level of risk. And finally, if this victim has been referred to any other MARAC, and if so, when and where. This is particularly important if a victim moves from area to area. This could be through choice or trying to flee a perpetrator. It could also be as a result of the perpetrator moving the victim to avoid services becoming involved. Pages 3 and 4 give you more information about the definition for a repeat MARAC and the different threshold criteria for a referral to MARAC. You can read through these when completing the referral to refresh your memory if needed. We now go on to page 5, which starts the DASH risk assessment. The first question: has the current incident resulted in injury? This is quite a simple yes or no answer. However, it is important to explain if this incident has caused any injury and to document what these are. For example, you may say the victim was pushed down the stairs and has bruising along her arm and shoulder. If this incident hasn't caused an injury, it is important to consider if there have been any previous injuries. These should also be recorded, but no can be ticked for this question. For example, the victim may advise she was kicked in the leg 6 months ago by the perpetrator and had bruising and a small cut to her right knee. It's important to get as much detail as possible, including any approximate dates. This information will help you to form a professional judgment at the end of the risk assessment. Question 2 asks, are you very frightened? You can answer yes or no for this question. There is space for an explanation in question 3. Question 3 asks, what is the victim afraid of? Is it further injury or violence? Do they feel the abuser might kill them, themselves, or children or other people? Are they afraid of further injury or violence? Answer yes or no, and the victim's answer will usually follow on from question 2. For example, yes, I am very frightened. I am worried the perpetrator may come to my house and try and break in. I'm scared that I will be hurt. The victim may answer no, but say, I feel very anxious about the situation and I'm not sleeping. It is important to consider any responses and record this information, as it will help to form a decision based on professional judgment. Question 4. Do you feel isolated from family or friends? Does the abuser try to stop you from seeing family, friends, doctors, other people? It is important to consider in this question that the victim may not have been physically prevented, but this question helps you to consider elements of controlling behaviour. For example, the victim may say, yes, they never let me visit my family and I was not allowed to go to the doctor on my own. Or they may say no, but he or she always got annoyed when my mum visited and in the end my mum stopped visiting. Question 5. Are you feeling depressed or having suicidal thoughts? You can record yes or no and record any comments that the client says. For example, no, I'm not suicidal, but I feel very anxious and I'm currently taking antidepressants. If you ask the question and someone tells you that they are feeling suicidal, you may need to explore this further. Does the victim want to harm themselves now? Do they have a plan for suicide? Do they want to hurt themselves? Discuss with them how they feel. It is important to remember we're not all trained mental health professionals, so you must pass this information to the appropriate service to make an assessment. Access emergency support, such as calling 999 for an ambulance or their GP for support, in line with your organisation's safeguarding policy. Question 6. Have you separated or tried to separate from the abuser within the past year? It's important to consider if the victim has separated and reconciled and why this has happened. For example, were they pressured by the perpetrator? Did they resume the relationship out of fear or necessity? Are there implications around homelessness if they were to leave? Did the victim want to separate but felt unable to? Record any comments with as much detail as possible. Question 7 asks, is there conflict over child contact? It's important to consider what contact is currently in place and is this a means for continued abuse. Does the abuser threaten to report the victim to social services, threaten to kidnap the children, threaten they will apply for custody? Are there any official orders in place regarding child contact, and have these been adhered to? Question 8 asks, does the abuser constantly text, call, contact, follow, stalk or harass the victim? Note the word constantly in this question. Stalking is often initiated following separation, but also happens within relationships and may manifest in obsessive policing of the victim's movements. Stalking is not only calls and messages or following in person. Behaviours are not always ostensibly malicious and include unwanted sending of gifts or letters, making contact on anniversaries, birthdays, turning up unannounced at home or work. Abusers may enlist others to conduct stalking behaviour or use children to obtain information about the victim, such as new relationships, activity and new addresses. Question 9 asks, are you pregnant or had a baby within the last 18 months? Pregnancy is known to increase risk of harm, and physical violence may be initiated for the first time in this period. Assaults are more commonly targeted towards a victim's stomach area during pregnancy. Risk of harm to the unborn child or new baby needs to be considered. If separated, an abuser may use contact with the child to continue abuse. If the victim is pregnant, note in the comments when the child is due, as this needs to be factored into safety planning. Question 10 asks, is the abuse happening more often? Consider if the frequency of the abusive incidents are greater than previously. Remember, this question relates to all forms of abuse and not just physical abuse. When was the last incident? How many incidents have there been in the last 12 months? This will give you an indication of how frequent the abuse is happening. Question 11 looks at, is the abuse getting worse? Is the most recent incident worse than the last? If so, in what way? Consider all forms of abuse and their severity. For example, has controlling behaviour extended into more areas of the victim's life? Has gaslighting increased? Was there once one mode of abuse and now there are multiple? Has the physical abuse caused more injury? There may have been a gradual escalation over time, so consider historic incidents in relation to recent ones. Question 12. Does the abuser try to control everything that you do, and is he or she excessively jealous? This can be answered yes if either or both elements of behaviour is present. Common indicators of excessive jealousy and control include accusations of infidelity, police and victims' movements, statements such as, if I can't have you, no one can. Question 13. Has the abuser ever used weapons or objects to hurt you? Note the word ever. This is important to capture any incident which has involved weapons or objects. This includes household objects such as mobile phones, ashtrays, etc. being used to harm the victim. Write these incidents in the comment section with approximate dates if the victim can recall them. This question can also be used to ascertain if the abuser has access to any weapons. Question 14 asks, has the abuser ever threatened to kill you or somebody else and you believe them? Include threats sent by text, email, social media. The crucial element to satisfy a yes response is that the victim held the belief that the abuser meant the threat and or was capable of carrying it out. Consider that threats may come from multiple individuals in cases of honour-based violence. The victim will know the abuser well, so it is important to ascertain their fears. They may minimise the threats. Question 15. Has the abuser ever attempted to strangle, choke, suffocate or drown you? Note the question asks for any of these incidents, not restricted to recent ones. This includes hands around the throat, attempts to smother, use of objects to attempt strangulation. Ascertain when these occurred and any injuries or loss of consciousness. Question 16 asks, does the abuser do or say things of a sexual nature that make you feel bad or that physically hurt you or someone else? It is important to ask this question to a victim, no matter how uncomfortable it might make us feel. Victims are more unlikely to volunteer this information of their own accord unless they are actually asked the question. Victims may not appreciate that sex without consent constitutes rape and may have normalised any sexual abuse. It is important to determine if consent was present. Sexual abuse does not just include rape, but can also include the victim feeling pressured or coerced into sex, the use of weapons, revenge pornography, unwanted touching, refusing to use contraception, using insulting sexual terms, any forced sexual activity with others or prostitution, and it is important to document any forms of sexual abuse that have been taking place. Question 17 asks, is there any other person who has threatened you or of whom you are afraid? It's important to establish who is threatening the victim, as there may be more than one abuser living with the victim. We see this a lot in honour-based violence cases, where it may also be siblings, parents, wider family members, or even the wider community putting pressures on victims. This can also occur in cases where the perpetrator may be part of a gang and the victim may have further people threatening them. It's important to document who's threatening the victim and of whom they are scared of. Question 18 asks, do you know if the abuser has hurt anybody else? Consider if the abuser has hurt previous partners or family members, and if this is current or historic. If this constitutes a past history of violence, some victims may be intimidated by the perpetrator and may be reluctant to share this information with a professional. Knowing that the abuser has hurt people can inform further risk assessments of if the perpetrator is a serial domestic abuse perpetrator. Question 19. Has the abuser ever mistreated an animal or family pet? Sometimes perpetrators would harm or attempt to harm family pets as another form of control and intimidation. It can also be used as an indicator for the potential for future violence. Question 20 asks, are there any financial issues? Are you dependent on the abuser for money? Have they recently lost their job? Are there any other financial issues? This is important as this may be a barrier to prevent the victim from seeking help or leaving if they are being financially abused. Consider whether there are language barriers. The victim may be new to the country and not know their entitlement to benefits. Does the victim have recourse to public funds? Are they entitled to access benefits and housing? Are there any debts that the victim has as a result of financial abuse from the perpetrator? Question 21. Has the abuser had problems in the past year with drugs, prescription or other, alcohol or mental health that has created problems in leading a normal life? What is called a toxic trio is when domestic abuse, substances and mental health are all present. It's important to consider if the perpetrator has had any problems in the past 12 months with substances or mental health. Document what substances are being used or what mental health issues are present. Have these been formally diagnosed? How do these affect the perpetrator's behaviour? Is the abuse worse when the perpetrator is using substances? Question 22 asks, has the abuser ever threatened or attempted suicide? This is important because the perpetrator may use coercion, threats to hurt him or herself if the victim leaves, contact the police or other services. If a perpetrator is suicidal and has attempted suicide, it opens the risk to consider as a professional familiar homicide and whether this is something that the abuser may be at risk of. Question 23. Has the abuser ever breached bail, an injunction or any agreements for when they can see the victim or the children? Document what orders have been in place in the past and what has been breached. This gives an indication of the perpetrator's propensity to adhere to court orders and bail conditions, etc. Consider the level of any breaches. For example, was it what some people would call a low-level breach where they've sent a text message, or did they attend the property and assault the victim? Question 24. Do you know if the abuser has ever been in trouble with the police or has a criminal history? Again, note the word ever. This question looks at the criminality of the perpetrator and their criminal history. Not all victims may know the answer to this question, but it is important to document what the victim is aware of. This may lead to further disclosure needing to be made if the victim is not aware of a perpetrator's history. If as a professional you are aware that the perpetrator has a criminal history, you can add this into the comment section later. You've now reached the end of the risk assessment questions. Count the number of yes responses and record the total at the bottom. The last box on the referral form is for consideration by professional. This is your opportunity to record any further information you have that you've not already recorded on the form but pertains to the risk. This could be in relation to vulnerabilities, if you feel the victim is minimising the abuse, if the victim has refused to answer any questions or any other concerns you may have. It can also be useful to record any information in relation to the perpetrator that's known, such as access to weapons or firearms. What does the perpetrator do for a job? Does this give them unique access to weapons or an opportunity to continue abuse? Are they in a job where they work with vulnerable people? This can all add to the risk for the victim as well as the wider public.